everyone, and welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us for this exciting webcast with LabStat and CannDelta. My name is Rachel Colic, and I will be your host for today. So over the next hour, it's going to be jam-packed with valuable insights on setting up a successful micro-cannabis operation, like I said, from the LabStat and CannDelta experts. And stay with us after the main stage presentation for one-on-one networking sessions with our esteemed speakers and additional experts from their respective teams. So collect up your questions as they go through the presentations, and you'll be able to get answers to them at the end. So definitely stick around for that. Before we get started, let me share with you a little bit about LabStat and CannDelta. So LabStat and their sister company LabSmart are part of a network of best-in-class companies across North America, converging to simplify analytical testing and regulatory compliance for your business. This alliance provides you with comprehensive testing, consulting, training, and auditing services to ensure proactive compliance for your business at all levels with one simple phone call. That's the LabStat advantage. CannDelta is a cannabis regulatory consulting company that understands the necessity of continuous change and innovation in the cannabis industry. And they support their clients to help them stay compliant within the existing and ever-changing legal framework. With extensive regulatory and scientific backgrounds, many of their consultants have previously worked at Health Canada's medical cannabis program and inspectorate labs. Our esteemed speakers for the day. Lucas McCann is the co-founder and chief scientific officer at CannDelta. There, he provides oversight on all of their projects. Lucas has a PhD in organic chemistry, so he has a strong understanding of how to set up a lab, performing extraction, and conducting analytical testing. After leaving university, Lucas worked at Health Canada in the health products branch. This gave him a strong understanding of internal government policies and procedures, which certainly helps him to understand how Health Canada works with applicants. Lucas, along with another employee from the medical cannabis program, left Health Canada to start CannDelta. Since then, the company has grown to 20 employees in just a few years, and CannDelta has helped over 100 applicants of all sizes get licensed and stay on Health Canada's good side. CannDelta has a special consulting program for micro-licensing and for nurseries. Today, Lucas will be talking about some of the myths surrounding micro-licensing, as well as some of the lessons learned from others who have walked that road alone. Devin Sears is the Director of Research and Development at LabStat and LabSmart. There, Devin is responsible for the development and validation of new analytical methodologies used for product testing across the cannabis and natural health products portfolios. Devin has also been tasked with the overhaul and modernization of the analytical methods used to test cannabis products. As part of this effort, LabStat and LabSmart have secured new instrumentation for pesticide analysis. They've overhauled their residual solvents methods and are preparing to roll out an expanded terpene method. Devin is also responsible for method development and validation for natural health products, including vitamins, supplements, and herbal products. Devin also has a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and prior to joining LabStat and LabSmart in 2019, he spent more than a decade as a senior research scientist developing analytical methodologies for the assessment of active pharmaceutical ingredients. In today's presentation, Devin will share insights on the key elements to consider when preparing your cannabis products for testing, understanding your lab's methods, and interpreting the data presented on a C of A, which of course is becoming a hotter topic by the day. So we have two incredible experts here today to share with you their expertise. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Lucas.
Thanks for that warm introduction, Rachel. Today I'm going to be talking about, are micro licenses unfairly targeted by Health Canada? It's a brief look at the myths and the pitfalls of operating as a micro or a nursery. A little bit about us, CannDelta, leading consulting company. We're also scientists and formerly with Health Canada. So if you have questions about how we can help you stay compliant or get a license, we're more than happy to chat. You can come visit us at CannDelta.com. Let's define a micro license. A micro license is a licensed subclass for cultivation or processing, and sometimes it includes nurseries. It allows a license holder to produce cannabis for the medical or the recreational market. Micro licenses, and now excluding nurseries, have limits on the amount of cannabis or cannabis products that they are permitted to produce. The goal for these license types is to create a low barrier point of entry for small businesses such as legacy or craft growers, farmers, or families to enter the regulated market and to begin producing cannabis through the legal framework. Nurseries, on the other hand, don't have the same limits, but they're often classified as the same category of license as it pertains to a lot of the requirements for getting a license application in and approved by Health Canada. So, true or false? It is easy to get a micro license. And currently, we're sitting at about just over 600 commercial production licenses across Canada for all license types. I'm going to say that this is mostly true. From the physical security side, you're not required to have any visual surveillance with a micro license. That means no high definition cameras everywhere. So the cost for implementing physical security, which has very expensive servers to retain all that 4K video data or high definition data of the perimeter, the storage, the operational rooms, is not required. You only need a few access control points for a micro, and those access control points can be made a little bit more simple than what we would typically see in a standard. So in a standard, we would have, for example, card readers on both sides of a door to record ingress and egress, for example, at the secured storage area. With micros, it's pretty commonly accepted to use timesheets in these areas, which requires a little bit of discipline to make sure that we're recording that information every time someone comes in or out. But you're not required to sort of have that same initial level of security investment. So from the physical security standpoint, this is mostly true. But this will change if you add in a sale for medical purposes license. Adding in this license to a micro subclass brings your physical security level up. So it would allow the license holder to sell to patients directly through an online portal, which is fantastic. That's another revenue stream for you to consider. But now your physical security requirements for a micro increase to a standard level. So one of the advantages of being a micro, and that's the cost savings for implementing your facility's physical security, are lost if we're also adding a sale for medical purposes license. From the fees perspective, this is certainly true. So security clearance fees are going to be the same. They're about $1,600 per person that goes on the application. Micros will typically have less people, less key personnel, less investors because it's a lower barrier to entry. So from that perspective, it could be true. But most importantly, the annual regulatory fees are only $2,500. For a standard, you're looking at a cool 23 racks a year to keep your license active. That's a lot of cash. But from the good production practices side, this is actually false. I think a lot of folks have a misconception that a micro license actually still means standard level of compliance as it pertains to GPP and record keeping. The pre-license expectations for a micro is that physical security requirements are definitely going to be relaxed. The post-license expectations, however, is that quality compliance standards and the expectations are equal for both the standard and a micro. This is a challenge. This is a challenge because micros typically have leaner operations with less people coming in and out. They have lower operational limits, and that restricts cash flow and the amount of annual revenue they can expect to come in every year. Good production practices are how we produce the product in a way that maintains the quality of that product to ensure that everything is safe for people to consume. It's one of the biggest advantages that we have of consuming products that are made from the legal framework. We know that those products are going to be safe because they're free of solvents, pesticides, other microbials, and as well as heavy metals. So that's fantastic because we don't get that same assurance from the illicitly sourced cannabis that folks sort of know and love. There's other issues surrounding quality, but there's been a lot of changes in the quality of the products that you can buy through the legal framework. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later in the presentation. So again, your standard operating procedures are going to be identical. You need to address pest control in the same way as you would. And for example, sanitation is going to be handled much the same way. Your storage, distribution, even how you build your building is going to be held to the exact same level as it would be for a standard. And I think this is a big misconception about folks coming into the micro licensing world that have sort of preconceptions or maybe misconceptions about what operating there looks like. And it can be very different from operating as perhaps a legacy grower or a hobby grower. Another true or false question. True or false? Health Canada makes life tough for micro operators specifically. I'm going to say that's false. I don't think that Health Canada has it out to try to keep micros out of our regulated system. Micro operations on the whole tend to generally be less compliant than the other standard subclasses. So we need to ask ourselves why that is. For everyone, the regulations are more or less the same. They're very detailed. They are confusing. They leave a lot of room for interpretation. And even internally, we have a lot of discussion about how the regulations can be interpreted. And we've even seen some discrepancies between one Health Canada reviewer to another. At a business level, this could be perhaps due to a poor understanding across the board of the regulations and what the responsibilities of the license holder actually detail. Here's a picture of Joel Lascelles that was in the Winnipeg Free Press. He's the applicant for Hearst Organic. Hearst Organic is the first microcultivation license that was granted by Health Canada. And he says to save money where you can. There's a quote here that he put in the paper saying, my partner had a shovel, so we dug with his shovel and we saved a little bit of money there. But that's why I tell people, save your money, it's a long process. This is definitely true. Microcultivators need to be smart about how they're spending their money. And unless they have about $1 million in the bank to be able to build their facility and get licensed, they need to be very careful about how they're spending their money. Let's talk a little bit about the lessons learned. Do it yourself has its risks. Here's an example of two very different facilities, both applying for the same license subclass using similar materials. The one on the left represents a photo from a facility that was from a late-stage applicant who had their GPP report denied because the materials that they choose to build their rooms out of was a material called oriented strand board, or OSB. Oriented strand board is a very inexpensive plywood that can be used to build structure, and it has somewhat of a rough surface on it. The issue with OSB, again, is that even after it's been coated several times with a sealant that could, for example, reduce or resist mold, mildew, and stand up to repeated scrubbings, there's still an inherent risk there that even after it's been coated, that there's a lot of sort of rough surface for things like mold and mildew to settle upon. This picture in the middle, though, is what's actually taken from what we would call a compliant facility. This compliant facility used the same material, coated in very much the same way, and even though both of these facilities used the same material, one was approved and one was not. This can be very frustrating for folks because it gives sense that Health Canada is effectively moving the goalposts. Let's talk about some of the challenges that go with having leaner operations. Now, these photos are taken from our staff during site audits, and all the identifying information has been removed. These are actually from standard class license holders, but the challenges remain the same regardless of the license class. Here we see an example of not just a secured storage, but an operational area in which cannabis was being stored. Now, you can't store cannabis for long periods of time in an operation area unless it's a secured storage. In addition to that, the way that the cannabis was being stored was non-compliant. The cannabis was being stored in clear plastic bags that were unlabeled, and there was no identifying way to tell what lot or batch that this product was from as it was sitting on the racking system. The picture on the right at the top shows a rack that contained a whole bunch of bottles for cleaning supplies, many of which were not labeled and had no identifying information on them about who created them. There were no sign-off sheets on that information from the QAP. So again, that can be another issue. And it's something that seems, very benign. At the bottom, we saw these totes that were basically sitting there for days at a time of cut sugar leaves that were slated for destruction. Now that material has to be destroyed basically within the same shift that it becomes clipped from the plant. However, those totes were sitting there for days. And then the last photo at the bottom right, that shows puddles of water that we had seen. And again, running along some irrigation systems, a ton of cannabis that was unable to sort of be swept away was sitting there rotting. These issues are going to be the same regardless of who you're working with or what license class you actually have. Again, the challenge comes from having less people to sort of pitch in and do the work is going to make this, I think, an increased challenge for folks that are operating with fewer staff. So where do we go from here? It's really about creating a culture of compliance within your workplace. It's very important that we all understand our general responsibilities and obligations as an employee at a license holding facility. We need experienced staff, and for those staff that aren't as experienced, they need ways to acquire access to that information and get trained. record keeping is going to be key. A good QA system is going to be very, very important to understand that, if we make mistakes, that there's something in process to help us fix those mistakes, some kind of corrective and preventative action measures. Sanitation is going to be key on this as well. One of Health Canada's favorite things to inspect when they come to a facility is logbooks that show cleaning schedules. This is, again, very important when applying for a sales amendment as well. Those can be one of the first things an auditor will ask for when they sit down at the table and introduce themselves and explain what's going to happen during today's site audit, which was very much a surprise for you and your staff. So inspection preparedness is super important, as well as training and vendor qualification. This all fits into that culture of compliance, and it's not something that needs to be held by the folks that are working in the operation space. It's everyone's job. Let's come back to why craft has a lot of inherent value in it. You can't beat craft quality. If we look at the number of plants per person working there, craft simply can't be beat. Each plant is getting so much care and attention, and the way that those products are handled once they've been harvested is unparalleled from what we would see at a standard license holder operation. Using something like automatic trimmers and these automatic dispensing machines that weigh things out, a lot of the trichomes on the products are going to be broken off, snapped off. The product just isn't the same when you put it under the microscope and have a really good look at it versus something you would get from craft, which has a lot of care in the product. Everything is handled by hand, it's hand trimmed, rack dried, not necessarily in that order. That really distinguishes products, and there's a huge demand for craft right now. And as a result, there are a lot of market share opportunities and additional revenue streams that these products can take. For example, there are two lines offered by the OCS now called small batch and handcrafted. The small batch or craft cannabis brand has to be from a facility that produces less than 10,000 kilograms. So any microcultivator would be eligible to be part of that small batch program. And then the handcrafted line would be hand trimmed, hand packaged product. Again, ensuring the quality of the product. With a customer and patient focused culture, micros are really paving the way for creating the next unique cannabis product lines. The nice thing about being a micro is that you're really accountable to your customers. You're not accountable to directors and like you are in larger corporations. So the ability to pivot is a lot more accelerated there versus as it would be if you're working in a bigger company. As a result, you're much more in contact with your customers, and that happens a lot even through social media. So when folks are being vocal about something, it's very easy to adapt and make amends on any issues. From a revenue standpoint, micros can be very profitable. This is obviously going to fluctuate depending on what the grams per or the dollars per gram that you can seek out for your dried flower. And again, with microcultivation, we're limited to canopy size of about 200 square meters. From the microprocessing side, that's 600 kgs of product you can process. If you're a micro and a processor, which is a great business model, you can process everything that you grow. The canopy size is going to include everything from anything with a leaf. So that includes clones, mothers, veg, and flowering. Assuming that we can get 4 harvests per year, 1 plant per square foot, maybe about 50 grams per plant, at a wholesale value of $3 Canadian per gram of dried flower, your estimated annual revenue is set to be about $1.3 million. Of course, that's going to depend on what prices are going for dried flower and the cannabinoid profile in that dried flower as well. That's still very awesome for a few person company. In addition, we've seen that the illicit market prices over time have stayed relatively constant, while the price of regulated cannabis has actually come down significantly, making it more competitive. We're seeing a huge shift from folks purchasing from the legacy market, coming over to the retail, the legal retail market, and purchasing from their local retail stores. This is very, very encouraging. This is definitely a reason to consider, if you're operating as a legacy grower, moving into the regulated market to take advantage of this. It's about achieving long-term success in the long run, so it's very important that if you want to go down the road of becoming a micro, that you plan your business. You want to know how to operate and what you're actually going to do when you get your license. The advantage here is that micros can pivot very, very quickly. So if you need to maybe change cultivars or go in a different product line direction, you can do that. And you don't need very much approval to do that as well. So there's a lot of advantage of being a smaller, leaner operation. We recommend applying or considering applying for a microprocessing and a sales amendment if you're a microcultivator. This will offer you the most flexibility to package your own product, and to be able to sell that product directly to the provincial wholesalers as well. And that's going to be very important if you want brand recognition. I think that some microcultivators have a sense that they've been defeated if they're spending all this time developing a craft product, ultimately just to sell it off to someone else who's going to white label it as their own. It's important to create a culture of compliance within your workspace, and that responsibility belongs to everyone, and that includes the CEO. And for long-term success, think about mock audits. Someday Health Canada is going to come by, and they're going to ask to see a few things. So being prepared for what they're actually going to ask for will set you up for long-term success. So you're having a much more pleasant conversation as opposed to those awkward conversations when, for example, your sanitation records aren't exactly what Health Canada auditors were expecting. Have you been unfairly targeted by an auditor? We invite you to share your experience with us. We'd love to hear it. You can reach out to us using the email address on the screen or use social media at CannDelta. I'll now pass it on to my associate from LabStat, Devin.
Thank you, Lucas. Today, I'd like to cover a topic that many consider a necessary evil. Operationally, the testing of your cannabis product can appear to be a significant risk to your ability to deliver product to market. In the next 15 minutes, I will hope to dispel that myth and demonstrate that building a good relationship with a testing partner can not only secure your brand, but play a significant role in building quality, reliability, and consistency into your products. From a very high level, we have broken down the testing process into 3 parts. This overview discussion will cover the essentials of each of the 3 parts and begin to lift the curtain on what is required to ensure your products are appropriately tested and the results are indicative of the quality of your product. Before we launch into a discussion of the testing process, I'd like to spend a few minutes to really calibrate ourselves on why laboratory testing is critical, not only to product development, but ongoing product manufacturing and supply chain management. First and foremost, lab testing is how we ensure product safety. Regardless of the format your product is delivered in, it will be consumed by the public, and their safety must be paramount. Failure to ensure the safety of the public can have legal ramifications and catastrophic impacts to your brand and ultimately your bottom line. Laboratory testing will allow you to accurately label your products. This seems obvious, however, there is still confusion across the industry what the regulatory agency's expectations are with respect to potency labeling. I will be very clear here. It is my recommendation that potency should be determined for every batch of product you produce. Especially for dried flower, the variability of product batch to batch will be too great to employ what is referred to as static labeling, or using the same label for all batches of the same product. We know that the total cannabinoid content batch to batch will vary, which will put your compliance with the regulations at risk if your label does not accurately reflect this variation. Lastly, reliable testing will provide you with data that forms the bedrock upon which you develop a consistent and robust manufacturing or growing process. Having accurate data allows you to make informed decisions about every step along the manufacturing process. Analytical data can provide insight into product quality and safety at many steps along the growing process. It also can help identify critical attributes that have the greatest impact on your final product quality, whether that be flower, isolates, distillates, or edibles. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of the testing process. The first step of the process is collecting a representative sample. We've all heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. Never has that expression been more impactful than the choice of samples taken for testing. It is extremely easy to bias your results, both high and low, just based on the composition of the sample you collect. Before we can get into a discussion of sampling, though, we have to clarify our definition of a batch. The reason you need to define a batch is because every batch should be tested to establish its safety and potency. As you can see in this slide, a batch of whole flower is typically defined as a set of plants grown under the same condition at the same time. This definition is commonly expanded to state that a batch is a set of plants with identical genes grown under the same conditions at the same time. Either definition of a batch is valid. However, it is up to you to determine the definition and clearly state in either a sampling standard operating procedure or SOP, or a sampling policy that guides how your company conducts sampling. Now on to sampling. It's worth repeating from the slide here. Sampling is the selection of a subset within a whole in order to estimate the characteristics of that whole. To recast this point, imagine I am running a survey, and in order for that survey to best represent the opinion of all Canadians, I need to ensure that one, the sample is large enough, the sample of people is large enough, and two, the sample is diverse. Intuitively, this survey analogy is easy to understand. You want to make sure that you have a sample that's large enough, a large enough cross-section of the entire population, so your survey results are representative of all Canadians' opinions. The same concepts apply to collecting samples for analytical testing. When sampling a batch, it is vitally important that you not introduce what we refer to as a bias. As we all know, cannabinoid concentration is not equal across all parts of the plant. If you were to sample more stems than leaves, for example, you could be introducing a bias that results in a lower cannabinoid content. There are regulatory documents available that provide full guidance on how botanicals and plant materials should be sampled. For example, under the Cannabis Act and GPP, the sampling of batches should be conducted in accordance with documents such as the European Pharmacopoeia, Section 2.8.20, Herbal Drugs, Sampling and Preparation. This document provides specific guidance on the number of samples to be collected from a batch and the minimum mass of those samples. To further elaborate that point, here is the specific guidance provided by the European Pharmacopoeia. These guidelines are for the sampling of product post-harvest and packaging. So for example, if after harvesting you have 200 containers of product, you should be sampling the square root of 200 plus 1 containers, or 15 containers. Similarly, if the total mass of your batch is 200 kilograms, then the total mass of the 15 samples taken from the 15 containers should be no less than 0.25% of the total mass, or 500 grams. This equates to 33.3 grams per sample taken. I know this may seem a bit confusing, but it will become second nature the more you use these guidelines and the more you think about your sampling practices. Additionally, we are always here to help and welcome the chance to talk with you regarding your sampling procedures. The second step is getting the testing done. Most laboratories are like all-night diners. They have a huge menu of tests that they can perform, and it's really up to you, the customer, to put in your order. This can be really challenging and daunting if you aren't sure what you need. The willingness of a laboratory to walk you through the different analysis packages they have is a sign of the laboratory's commitment to customer service and demonstrates the lab's understandings of the regulations. Don't be afraid to reach out to a lab and ask them what regulatory packages they offer for testing your cannabis products. The lab's ability to walk you through something like what I have shown here in this slide will be a tell as to the level of service you can expect from that laboratory. That said, this slide provides you the most basic summary of the regulatory framework that's in place around required testing for various cannabis product formats. This is by no means an exhaustive breakdown of the testing labs offer, but should serve as a basic testing requirements for your products. As you can see, all formats require at a minimum an assessment of potency and demonstration of no microbial contamination. However, if you look at dried flower, you must be testing for pesticide residues. And if you're looking at isolates, you should be testing for residual solvents as well. If you have any questions regarding the more nuanced testing packages that are out there and the value they may provide you, I'd be happy to discuss with you in a one-on-one session anytime after the webinar. The last major hurdle in testing your product is understanding the results. This is possibly going to be the most frustrating part of the process. The reason is that there are currently no standards in place on how data is to be reported. This is already confusing, right? I mean, the data is the data. How difficult can it be to report it? Well, this is really where the devil is in the details. For example, flower is graded based on the cannabinoid content, which is expressed as a percentage value. What does that percentage actually mean, though? In the strictest definition, that percentage represents the total weight of the THC in the flower divided by the total weight of the sample multiplied by 100. For example, say you have a product that tests 20% total THC. Obviously, that total THC is the combination of THC and THCA, but how does the lab actually calculate total THC value? The simplest way is just to straight sum the percentages. However, there's an issue there. So theoretically, say you have 1 billion molecules of THC and you have 1 billion molecules of THCA in your sample. So say I separate those two and I have two separate containers, one with THC and one with THCA. The one containing THCA would actually be heavier. So if we just sum the straight percentages, we're not actually reporting apples and apples, we're reporting apples and oranges. This is because the molecular structures are slightly different, causing the THC to be slightly heavier than THC, or the THCA to be slightly heavier than THC. If I just straight sum the two percentages, I'm not accounting for this weight difference and thus underestimating the total THC content. Thus, we apply a correction factor to the THCA percentage which corrects for the weight difference. Some labs may add a further correction factor accounting for an incomplete conversion between THCA and THC, but the industry standard is to account for the differences in molecular weights. Again, the more time you spend thinking about these concepts, the more in focus they will become, but you have to put in the effort and ask lots of questions. At the end of the day, a lab will sell you something you ask for, just like the all-night diner. It's up to you, the consumer, to be the informed consumer, though. Good labs will help make sure that you're an informed consumer, but you should never shy away from asking your lab lots of questions about how they report their results. As I mentioned earlier, there are additional tests that can be run to assess additional quality attributes of your product. These tests include terpene, water activity, moisture, heavy metals, and pesticides. Some of these tests may be required based on where your product lies on the cannabis value chain or supply chain. If you're unsure, again, ask us and we're here to help. Another common hurdle for those who are new to testing is the vernacular. In particular, terminology and acronyms related to the various units you might be presented with on your certificate of analysis. Regardless of the unit, most quantitative measurements are expressed in terms of the amount of an analyte per the amount of total sample. The common unit this type of quantified amount can be expressed in are presented here in this slide. Additionally, some terms you might run across are LOD and LOQ, or limit of detection and limit of quantitation. Important thing to remember is that the limit of quantitation is found at a higher concentration than the limit of detection. The limit of quantitation is the concentration at which the method has been established to be capable of accurately measuring an analyte. The limit of detection is the lowest concentration that a method has been proven to be capable of repeatedly detecting an analyte. Tying all that together, here is an example of what a certificate of analysis might look like. A certificate of analysis is an official document issued by the laboratory summarizing the results of the tests performed. Here we can see an excerpt of a C of A summarizing the cannabinoid results for a sample. What you will notice is that each cannabinoid analyzed has been individually listed. If a limit was specified for that cannabinoid, as was the case for total cannabinoids here, it will also be listed. Next, the observed result is listed. The result highlighted here, CBD, shows an example of an analyte that was not found at levels above the method quantitation limit of 0.008%. Since the value observed cannot be precisely determined, the laboratory has indicated that it was below the QL. This is a common way of denoting the fact that the analyte was observed, but at very low levels. Certificates of analysis should be well organized and tidy so as to ensure it provides a detailed summary of all the testing performed. Finally, some key points I would like to leave you with. First, ensure you have an appropriate sampling procedure in place and follow them. Second, ensure you are requesting the appropriate tests for your product. And third, educate yourself on the information provided in your lab certificate of analysis. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it back to our hosts.
Wow, thanks so much, Devin. Guys, that was such a jam-packed presentation full of information. I know that people have tons of questions that they're really excited to ask you. So thank you so much to the both of you for preparing that presentation and sharing your genius with us today. For everyone who is still here, thank you for joining us and spending time with us today. We are now breaking out into the networking room. So in the next few moments, you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see these sessions start to go live with our two esteemed speakers here, as well as other representatives from their companies. So you'll see we have a number of different breakout rooms dedicated to different topics. So jump in and out and meet all the experts that we have and ask your burning questions and get that expert advice while you are here today. So thank you again for everyone joining us, and we will see you in the rooms.